In this week's In-Ear Insights, we are back from the MarketingProfs B2B Forum 2022. Katie, your first in-person conference since, the whole public health crisis and stuff. Was my fourth, and would love to hear what were your big takeaways. What are the things that you heard or saw, and what are you going to do different?
Well, everybody's awkward. Nobody knows how to behave publicly anymore. No, it's interesting. You're right. It was my first event back, and it was a big event, at least for me. Like there was, lots of people milling around. So going into it, like I definitely had some of that anxiety of, I don't know what to expect anymore because, previously you could just show up at an event, do your thing, and now there's protocols and, all kinds of things, which is, good. I think that MarketingProfs did a really nice job of making sure that people could show up on their own terms and feel like their own safety, wasn't being compromised just for the sake of the conference. So I would say that was definitely a good thing. And I would like to see that trend continue and extend into other events. So I think that in terms of, takeaways, I think that was a big thing in terms of just like the comfortability of each individual attendee. I didn't get to attend a lot of sessions, unfortunately. I was sort of my personal goals for attending a conference aren't necessarily around learning what's going on. It's more I have goals of making specific connections and having conversations in order to, continue to grow the business. And thankfully, I was able to meet those goals and talk to those people. I did see sort of, it feels like there's this unspoken, like, bucking against artificial intelligence. There's, yeah, technology is cool. Yeah, AI is cool, but don't forget you're human. And so while speakers weren't going out of their way to necessarily diss the benefits of artificial intelligence, there was definitely this trend of don't forget to be human. Don't forget to personalize it. Don't fall into the trap of being like one of a million, falling into the masses, like stand out, be personal, like do your own thing, be an individual, be a snowflake. And so it was, I think that was the thing I saw the strongest was how do I stand out in a crowd amongst all this noise? And that's not a new, question. That's not a new thing that we should be asking ourselves. The way in which people were approaching it, I think, was sort of the I'm hesitant to call it new. Nothing is new anymore. That's the problem. But it's sort of the reinventing. So I think there was a lot of emphasis on don't forget to be an individual.
Interesting. When you hear people talking about artificial intelligence in that context, then what is it that they're saying specifically about it? So obviously the whole be human part is sort of the contrary position, but how are people understanding it? Have people's understanding improved in the last few years since the last time we were all out, doing the dog and pony shows?
Understanding of it being artificial intelligence?
Yeah.
I would say it's improved in the sense that now it's sort of just like a word that we all use in everyday vocabulary. Like, we talk about artificial intelligence the same way we might talk about like, a sweatshirt. It's just sort of like an everyday object now. Do we all own one? Not necessarily, but do we all sort of have a general idea of what it is? Sure. And I think that there is more of an understanding that artificial intelligence at its very, very basic core level is more automation. It's doing repeated tasks and getting some kind of an output. And so, I'd say that there's not an understanding of the sophistication of what you can do with artificial intelligence, but I would say actually there's probably more of a better understanding of what something like robotic process automation is, for example.
Got it. Intelligent automation, sort of the saving time of things. Got it.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I noticed was there were several sessions this time around on influencers, on influencer marketing. Our friend and colleague Ashley Zeckman did a really nice talk on it. And I thought it was very interesting that influencer marketing, I think B2B folks are still struggling with the perception that it's Kardashians or nothing,
Mhm.
um, and clearly that's not the case. But one of the macro trends that I think is just starting to be realized now is that as data privacy and data restrictions get tougher and tougher, rightfully so, influencer marketing may be one of the channels where you figure out, okay, who has my audience so that I can go after them, because I can't just buy a list from LinkedIn or Facebook or wherever you get your data from, or you used to get your data from.
Hmm. Well, I think it's also just sort of redefining what an influencer is. Um, you know, when you have platforms like TikTok and, other social platforms that are just sort of these quick snippets, pretty much anyone can, go viral for something and then suddenly be called an influencer. And so, like, again, sort of it's not a new concept, but there's always this mismatch of just because you have, you know, followers on your thing doesn't mean that they're well aligned with what it is that you do. And so I think that, so I was driving, unfortunately, while Ashley's session was going on, so I missed it. But I would imagine that there is, some sort of a conversation around making sure that there's alignment between what you do and what these influencers, generally talk about and speak for, because it comes back to, the brand itself. They represent your brand. They represent, your products, your services, and quite frankly, you, if you're the one who hired them. And so making sure that you're doing that due diligence and where to find that data, how to make those decisions. Again, that's not a new concept, but it's one of those concepts that you need to continually repeat, because as new platforms get developed and as a new crop of influencers, basically come onto the market, people get excited. They're like, oh, well, here's someone who nobody else is working with yet. Let me go ahead and grab them. They have a lot of followers. And all of those rules that we've developed in terms of vetting influencers just goes out the window. We forget. So people like Ashley, who do this professionally to, source influencers, her job is to keep repeating the same message over and over again, because a new crop of marketers come onto the market too, and now they're tasked with finding influencers, and they need to figure out what the rules are. So those of us who are constantly repeating the rules, that's our job. That's really the trend, is we stay the course and we keep repeating the same message for all the turnover that happens in the marketing industry. So for someone like me, where I go to a conference, I'm like, well, none of this is new, but I'm also not new to my role.
Exactly. And speaking of that, it feels like the great marketing reboot is in full effect. I was in Michael Barber's email session, and at one point during his talk, he said, how many people are familiar with Apple's mail privacy protection, which came out in June of 2021? It was a big deal because we had talked about, even on this show, about how it's going to wreck open rates. And it kind of has messed up open rates because of the way Apple's servers prefetch email. And he says, how many people, and this is a room of about 100 people, how many
Mhm.
people have heard of Apple's mail privacy protection? Of course, me being the nerd in the front of the room, like, hey, me. And then I look around, not a single hand. I'm like, this is more than a year old, and this is impacting every email marketing program, period. And no one else has their hands up. It can't be shyness, because got the nerd up front waving his hand. So you're not going to look more nerdy than that from a social pressure thing. I was stunned. Like, how do you folks do your jobs if you don't know about this thing, which dramatically impacts your email marketing? And this kept coming. And to your point with influencer marketing, right? Having to repeat the same old things like reach, relevance, engagement, brand alignment, brand safety. In your conversations with attendees, actually, now that I think about it, we actually got some feedback, some fairly dissatisfied feedback from a couple of participants in our workshop saying, I wanted a basics 101 GA4 workshop and this was not it. So
Mhm.
how do you feel about the great marketing reboot? Did you see it firsthand?
I mean, I feel like we've been talking about it, and we already knew that people wanted the basics, and that to me was just more information. some of the feedback was I wanted a GA4 course. The other feedback was too much data science. And so, when I hear your takeaway that, people aren't paying attention to data privacy, for example, or how it impacts, to me, that's like a 301 in terms of their understanding of how something like an email marketing works. Like the basics of email marketing is, how do I get the email out to people so it doesn't bounce? Like that's step number one. So that's the 101. Number two is, curating your subscriber list and keeping it clean. And then number three is figuring out, data privacy. So I'm unsurprised that that was your takeaway because, again, you're not new to the industry. So you don't need to go back to the refreshers of the 101 and the 201. You're sort of at the 501, the 601 in terms of your understanding of how, something like an email marketing works. And so you were sort of at that deeper knowledge level. So yeah, I think we definitely saw the great reboot because, it's funny. We were talking about how to put together a marketing strategy or a measurement strategy rather, going beyond just throwing numbers in a spreadsheet. And to us, to you and I, Chris, we're like, well, yeah, it's more than just a spreadsheet. But to people who are new to a role or new to a company, you have to relearn this all over again. And it's not our job to pass judgment on the fact that these people don't know it. It's our job to continue to educate and set them up for success. And so I don't think we're going to get away from teaching the basics anytime soon.
No, probably never. But it has definitely been more prominent that people are much more back to square one. Even, we were at a couple of the influencer events and things, and even talking to folks who work for prominent brands. Our friend Justin Levy brought along one of his team members, and just listening to the person sort of explain from their point of view, because they're new in their role and they're new to the industry, going, wow, there are a couple of decades of I guess legacy is one way to explain it, or history that would inform, in this case, like your social media marketing strategy, that just aren't there. And it sounded like, in conversations with someone else, there are no one has even the basic theoretical frameworks of how to set this stuff up. I mean, I remember in the Friday session we put up the 5 Ps framework, and people are, whipping out their phones and taking photos of it. I'm like, I mean, it's not super new. I mean, it's not even super new to us anymore.
It's not super new to us, but I think this is something that we've, talked about before, is like, at least for me, my job is not innovation. My job is to take tried and true, frameworks and practices and all those things and present them in a way that people can understand them and connect with them. And so the 5P framework is a different way. It's a different spin on tackling the same challenges that people have had for, decades. People are the problem. Great. How do I approach it? That's not a new problem at all. We have a lack of process. Okay, go ahead and document everything. The way in which you approach tackling that problem is what's new, because that's where you bring in artificial intelligence. That's where you bring in, one of the 9,000 tools on the MarTech 9000. There's a new approach to the same problems. And I really think like that is, that's sort of the name of the game. That's the point of these conferences, is the problems themselves aren't new. The approach to solving the problem is what could be different, but it doesn't have to be, revolutionary and, this epic thing. It can just be, that's a really good point. I never thought about it that way. Let me go ahead and see if that works. Because the biggest takeaway that we got from our workshop, of the 8 hours that we taught, what was the one thing everybody said they were going to try first?
User stories.
User stories. Guess what? I didn't invent user stories. User stories have been around for a very long time. But what we did was we gave them a new tool, which was a user story, to approach solving the same problems that they've already had. That's the goal. To me, that was a success. If people can take away something different and try that and find a little bit of success, then we've done our jobs.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I did notice that in a lot of the other sessions, because between the ones I attended and then I was catching up over the weekend on some of the ones, streaming some of the recorded ones, because there were a couple I wanted to get to, but just couldn't because of time. There were a lot of, I think, very good tactical improvements here and there that I thought were really helpful. So one from our friend Tony now, who videoed our Friday session. You did a great session on video, and one of the things he was very adamant about, like, okay, that makes a lot of sense just from my own behavior. He's like, stop putting intros that are, on your video. Stop putting these, 10, 15, 20, 30, 60-second intros. He's like, nobody wants to watch them. And as I was scrolling through LinkedIn this weekend, looking at, and there's this one video that had like a 9.5 seconds intro, and I just kept going. I'm like, oh, well, I guess that's... So I know, personally, I'm going to be trying that out now. Maybe try out with the Trust Insights podcast. Say, do we need the 15-second intro, or is it pretty apparent just from our branding? Like, yeah, you're listening to our show. You don't need an intro for it.
Well, I would liken that to looking for a recipe online and getting 8 pages of backstory of your grandmother's, neighbor's, cousin's, donkey's, recipe for, mashed corn, because they would go pick it in the dawn of the morning with the slightest little drop of dew. That this one time reminded me of a trip that I took to Vienna. And while I was there, I met this woman who would, hand stitch these little sayings into the carpet. And by the way, one of the sayings reminded me of this time that my grandfather told me this story about the war. And for the love of God, just tell me how many eggs go in the cake. It's very much the same thing. Like, the intro is nice, but it's, think about when you're streaming, for example, TV shows and movies. If you're watching a television series and you happen to sit down and watch, more than one episode, a system like Netflix gives you the option to skip the intro, because, like, I already know what I'm watching. I don't need to watch the intro all over again. I've been watching it for 6 hours. I don't need to be reintroduced to the thing. And so I see intros on, like, videos and that kind of thing very much the same way. That was a rant that I didn't know was coming, but here we are.
Well, I think then that makes it pretty clear we're gonna do a little bit of trimming and house cleaning. We
needed to do some updating anyway.
Exactly, but this just makes it simpler. Whoosh, gone. The other thing that I thought was fairly insightful from one of the email marketing discussions was, and this is simple. We've been doing it for a little while in our own stuff. Ann Hanley's been doing it in her newsletters for a while. Is that unlike images in newsletters, which don't load by default and stuff, emoji load all the time. They're just character sets. So if there are calls to action you want to bring into, to visually set apart in a newsletter, just use some emoji. Use that little pointing finger at the link you want people to click on. And I can definitely confirm, just having read certain newsletters, like, yeah, it does catch your eye. If you're not like, pouring emoji all over everything. If you are selective in its use for like calls to action, put the little pointing finger, and maybe that's it. It is enough to set apart a link from the rest of your wall of text that is noticeable. So I've been trying it now for a few weeks, just in my own stuff, but we've been using it. I've been using it in subject lines for probably the better part of a year now. And yeah, it's not something that, is going to be blocked, and it looks consistent across platforms.
I definitely say that's a proceed with caution, because I think, it's a slippery slope. Once you start using one, you're like, oh, let me add another one. And then the next thing you know, your whole newsletter is this like goofy thing of all these emojis instead of actually like, speaking words. So I would definitely proceed with caution. I would definitely use some restraint in using emojis in your communication, because, I think that emojis are fine. I think there's a time and place for them, but you also don't want them to distract from your message or take away from the authority that you're trying to demonstrate.
Yeah, we use 3 of them right now. I was just looking back. We use 3 of them in the Trust Insights newsletter. One is for the the download call to action at the very top, and then there's 2 on each of our paid courses, just to set them aside from the free courses and stuff that are available. So things that are high value, high attention needed on them.
We use emojis.
We have been for a couple issues now.
Okay. We'll take that offline.
So in terms of other takeaways from the event, any other, did you get a chance to attend any sessions other than the ones we were speaking at?
Unfortunately, no. I mean, I was in transit for a bit of it. So I, fortunately live locally to the event. And so I was able to go home. I didn't need to stay the whole time, which was something that I needed. I got exhausted by the event pretty quickly. And then in terms of being able to catch up with people, the only time I was able to find some quiet was while everybody else was in sessions. But the benefit of an event like MarketingProfs is that they did put all of the sessions online. And so I can spend some time this week catching up on the sessions that I didn't have a chance to catch last week. So I may have more takeaways for you down the line. But I think overall, the big takeaways, as we've talked about, are, the basics never go out of style. Repeating them, finding new approaches to the same problems is what is always going to resonate. Always going to resonate. Bringing the shiny new object is wonderful. People really, glom onto it. But if it's not actionable, if it's not something that people can go, oh, okay, I know exactly what to do with that, then in some ways it's just kind of like you're wasting your time, you're wasting their time. So if you want to introduce a shiny new object, make sure that it's, actionable. Make sure that people can do something with it.
Yep. And what about the session that we did on Friday? What were sort of the takeaways from what we had a chance to present? Because I think we had the audio from that. I know we're going to have a video from it at some point in the next couple of months, but I was thinking we might turn the audio into like a bonus podcast episode. But what was your takeaway from what we shared in our management and leadership sort of fireside chat?
The big takeaway was, so I had a couple of people asking questions afterwards, and the trend is I just moved from an individual contributor to a manager. How do I reset my thinking? Or how do I tell my boss that I'm no longer an individual contributor? Like, they know they promoted me, but they still treat me as such. And so, there was 2 big things, at least in my brain, was document everything you do, because the biggest issue that I see with new managers is delegation. And it's not that they don't want to, it's that they don't trust that anyone can do it exactly the way that they want to do it. So document everything, set those expectations of this is how I do it. This is exactly, follow this recipe, and then you build that trust. The other thing is you need to set those boundaries but also hold them. And so if your boss who's promoted you is still treating you like an individual contributor, but then also coming to you and saying, but I also need you to manage the team, that's when you need to reset those expectations and boundaries. Say, okay, here's what I can do, here's what I can't do. But then you yourself are responsible for maintaining those boundaries, because you're going to be like, oh, but it'll take me 5 minutes. I can just do the thing. I'll just do it myself. You're then setting yourself backward and not moving forward. And so it's a mind shift. It's tough. It takes practice, but that's the biggest challenge I see. And so our recommendation was hire a professional manager and not someone who's a practitioner.
From that point of view, though, do you see companies figuring out or seeing the need to figure out that individual contributors and managers are separate professions?
They're not figuring it out, but there is a need to figure it out.
How does somebody get started on communicating that to leadership to say, like, yeah, this is not, you're basically asking your top talent to no longer use their top talents?
It comes down to starting with the skills gap assessment. What does the company need? What does your team have? And what do you want to do? Because putting people in roles that they don't want to do is how you get turnover. And so, if someone wants to be a manager, that's great. They need to be clear on what that entails, and they are no longer the rock star of the team. They are now sort of fading into the background and letting other people shine. If they are okay with that, great. But that's part of the conversation is, do we need a bunch of rock stars, Or do we need just people who can, be the tour manager and get the rock stars on stage? And so I'm a tour manager. I'm not the rock star, but
That is a great analogy.
I'm good with that role.
Right.
And I have no problem fading into the background to let other people get on stage and shine, because that means I've done my job. And so that's a big part of it. It's people's, we talk about attitude and aptitude. It has to be the right attitude. I would say 90% of the job of a manager is the right attitude.
Is that something that you can determine in the hiring process, though? Like, how do you tell someone who has a good attitude as a manager versus someone who doesn't?
We do. I mean, you absolutely can. And I feel like we're starting to go down a little bit of a rabbit hole off topic. So we can talk about that. But yeah,
maybe that's a separate episode.
It is. You absolutely can determine the right attitude. And it's through, a series of, questions that are related to it. Tell me about your experience, blah, blah, blah. And it's more than just tell me about your experience. You have to get into more specifics. And then you present different scenarios and you see how people would handle them. You're not going out there saying, I need you to fade into the background, because quite honestly, there's a lot of people who'd be like, I don't want to do that. I want to get credit where credit is due. And so you have to start to dig into those kinds of conversations.
Yeah, I think this definitely needs to be its own episode, because I think there's a lot to unpack there.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is, as always with any conference, some of the best learning and some of the best conversations always happen in the hallways at those unscheduled, unplanned moments. We have a long list of them for ourselves to work on. But one that was from one of the SEO roundtables early on is that the prevalence of Google taking clicks away from sites is continuing. I had a chance to sit down with Andy Crestodine and showed him our Search Console metrics and said, my impressions are going up. Yay, right? Google thinks I'm more relevant, but our clicks going down. He's like, yeah, that's because you're competing on terms that Google wants to keep the traffic for. So they're going to show a featured snippet or an instant answer or something that will not send you the traffic. He said, so that's probably what's going on there, because he said if your impressions were going down, then something's wrong with your site. But you look at the last 6 months, the Trust Insights website impressions are going up, up, up. So we're doing a good job of being relevant. It's just Google's taking our lunch. So. Mm-hmm. Those are some of our takeaways from Marketing Profs. Like Katie said, we will have more as we process through all of the different sessions and things. But if you were there at the event, or you weren't there, or you were hybrid and online, or you've been to another event similar recently and you've got some takeaways you'd like to share, pop on over to our free Slack group. Go to trustinsights.ai/analytics for marketers and share the little takeaways and things that you've gotten from recent events. And wherever it is you watch or listen to the show, if there's a place you'd rather have it on instead, go to trustinsights.ai/TI podcast, where you can find the show on most major platforms. And if you enjoy the show, please leave us a review and leave us a rating. That'd be very helpful. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll talk to you soon.